Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to a quiet place where the past comes to rest beside you. Tonight we travel far across the wide and open grasslands of Central Asia to a world of cold winds, fast horses, and a story so large it would touch nearly every corner of the known world. Imagine a single empire so vast that a rider could travel for months in one direction and never leave its borders. An empire built not by an old and powerful kingdom, but by scattered tribes of wandering herders who once owned almost nothing at all. This is the story of how a boy who was left to die in the freezing wilderness grew into a ruler whose armies would shake China, break the great cities of the Islamic world, and bring the kingdoms of Europe to the edge of ruin. It is one of the strangest and most powerful stories in all of human history. It is the story of how a people who had no cities, no written language at first, and no great wealth came to control more land than any empire before them. It begins on the open steppe, a sea of grass that stretches farther than the eye can follow, where survival was a daily struggle and trust was a rare and precious thing. Over the next few hours, we will follow this story from its quiet and humble beginning, all the way to its enormous height, and then to its slow and gentle fading. We will meet the people who lived it, walk through the cities they built and the cities they destroyed, and try to understand how it all came to pass. But before we go any further, I want to take a moment. On this channel, we explore fascinating subjects in calm and careful detail. These journeys are made to help you relax, focus, or simply enjoy the flow of discovery. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Is it day or night where you are? What time is it? Are you tuning in while studying, working, commuting, or simply winding down? Drop your answer in the comments below. It is always wonderful to hear from you. And if you enjoy content like this, please support the channel by liking this video and subscribing. It helps us bring you more of these journeys. Now let us go back to the very beginning, to a cold morning on the steppe many centuries ago, where a young mother stood alone with her children and almost no hope at all. The land of Mongolia is a hard and beautiful place. In the summer, the grass turns green and soft, and the sky stretches so wide and blue that it seems to swallow the whole world. But in the winter, the cold comes down like a heavy hand, and the wind cuts through everything, and the temperature falls so low that breath turns to ice in the air. Into this world, around the year 1162, a boy was born. His people gave him the name Temujin. He came from a family of some standing among the wandering tribes, for his father was a respected man and a leader of warriors. But standing on the steppe was a fragile thing, and it could be lost in a single moment. The wind did not care who your father was, and neither did your enemies. When Temujin was still a young boy, his father was poisoned by a rival tribe during what should have been a peaceful meal. With his father gone, everything changed in an instant. The followers who had once stood beside the family now turned away, for they saw no reason to obey a widow and her small children. They packed their tents, gathered their animals, and rode off across the grass, leaving the family behind with almost nothing. Temujin, his mother, and his brothers and sisters were abandoned to face the steppe alone. There were no warriors to protect them, and no herds large enough to keep them safe through the long winters. They had been left to die, and everyone expected that they would. But Temujin's mother was a woman of fierce strength and stubborn will. Her name was Holun, and she refused to let her children fade away into the frozen ground. She taught them to dig for roots and to gather wild onions and berries from the hard soil. They fished in the cold rivers and hunted small animals with whatever tools they could make. Hunger followed them, like a shadow through every season, and there were nights when sleep came only because their bodies were too tired to stay awake. Yet slowly, against every expectation, they survived. The boy who was supposed to die grew taller and stronger, and he watched the world around him with careful, patient eyes. Those early years carved deep marks into Temujin's mind. He learned that loyalty was the most valuable thing a person could have, and that betrayal could destroy a family in a single afternoon. He learned that the strong took what they wanted, and the weak were simply swept aside. And he learned something else as well, something that would shape the rest of his life. He learned that a person who had been abandoned could either give up and disappear, or grow harder and stronger than the people who had cast them out. Temujin chose the second path, and he never once looked back. The cold steppe had tried to kill him, and it had failed. And in failing, it had made him into something the world had never seen before. To understand how a single man could one day rule half the world, we must first understand the strange and broken world that he was born into. The steppe in those days was not a kingdom or a nation. It was a vast open land filled with many different tribes, each one separate and proud, each one suspicious of the others. There were the Tatars, the Khwarezmians, the Naimans, the Merkits, and many more, and they lived spread out across the grass in small groups that followed their herds from place to place. They did not build cities or farms. Instead, they lived in round tents made of felt and wood, tents that could be taken apart and packed onto carts whenever the season called them to move on. Their entire way of life turned around the horse. A child of the steppe learned to ride almost before they could walk, and a grown rider could spend days in the saddle without tiring. The horses of the steppe were small and tough, able to find food beneath the snow and to keep moving across great distances on very little. These people also depended on their other animals, on sheep and goats and cattle, which gave them milk and meat and wool and hides. They drank fermented mare's milk, ate dried meat, and wore clothing made from the skins of the animals they raised. Everything they owned could be carried with them, because they were always on the move, following the grass and the changing weather across the endless plain. But this was not a peaceful world. The tribes lived in a constant cycle of raiding and revenge. One group would steal horses or women from another, and the wrong group would strike back, and the cycle would continue for years and even generations. Blood feuds passed from father to son, and old grudges never seemed to die. To survive, a person needed allies, and alliances on the steppe were fragile and quick to break. A friend one season might be an enemy the next, depending on who held the most power and who offered the better reward. Trust was a rare gift, and those who gave it freely often paid for it with their lives. There was a custom on the steppe that helped bind people together across the divisions of blood and tribe. Two men could swear an oath of brotherhood, becoming what was called anda, sworn brothers who promised to stand by each other through anything. This bond was meant to be even stronger than family, a sacred promise that could not be broken without great shame. Yet even these oaths sometimes shattered when power and ambition came between the men who had sworn them. The steppe rewarded strength above all things, and loyalty often bent beneath the weight of survival. In such a world, it seemed almost impossible that anyone could ever bring these scattered and warring people together under one banner. And yet, the very things that divided the tribes also held within them the seeds of something greater. These were a people who could ride farther and faster than almost anyone on earth. They could survive cold and hunger that would kill others. They knew how to fight, how to track, how to endure hardship without complaint. If someone could ever find a way to unite them, to turn their endless feuding outward instead of against each other, they would become a force unlike any the world had known. The grass held a sleeping power, and it was only waiting for the right person to wake it. That person was the abandoned boy who had clawed his way back from the edge of death, and his time was slowly coming. Temujin's rise did not happen all at once. It came slowly, one careful step at a time, over many long and difficult years. As a young man, he understood something that many leaders of his day did not. He saw that the old way of raiding and revenge kept everyone weak and small, locked forever in the same bloody circle. He began to dream of something different, of a way to bind people together through loyalty and fair treatment rather than fear alone. But before he could build anything, he first had to survive, and survival in those years was far from certain. Powerful enemies still remembered his family, and a rising young leader made a tempting target for anyone who feared what he might become. When Temujin was still young, he was captured by a rival tribe that had once been connected to his family. They placed a heavy wooden collar around his neck, a device meant to keep a prisoner from running or fighting. For a time, he was held as a captive, watched closely and treated as a slave. But Temujin was clever and patient, and he waited for his moment. One night, during a feast when his guards had grown careless and tired, he struck the man watching him and slipped away into the darkness. He hid in a river, keeping only his face above the cold water, while his captors searched the banks around him. A sympathetic man from the tribe found him there and chose to help him, rather than turn him in. And through this kindness, Temujin escaped and made his way back to freedom. He never forgot those who helped him, and this too became a part of who he was. As he grew older, Temujin began to gather followers around himself. He did this in a way that was new and strange for the steppe. Instead of rewarding only those of noble birth, he gave honor and position to anyone who proved themselves loyal and capable, no matter how humble their family. A poor herder who fought bravely could rise high in his service, while a noble who betrayed him would find no mercy. This idea pulled many people to his side, for it offered them a future based on what they did rather than where they came from. Word spread across the grass that there was a leader who kept his promises, who shared the spoils of battle fairly, and who protected those who stood with him. Slowly, his camp grew larger, and his name grew stronger. He also relied on old alliances to build his strength. His father had once been the sworn brother of a powerful chief named Togrul, the leader of the Khwarezmian tribe, and Temujin went to this man and offered his service. Togrul became a kind of protector and ally, and together they fought against their shared enemies. Temujin also renewed his own bond of brotherhood with a man named Jamukha, a friend from his childhood who had become a respected leader in his own right. For a time, the two men rode side by side, sharing the same dreams and the same dangers. They were as close as brothers could be, and many believed they would lead the tribes together into a new age. But the friendship between Temujin and Jamukha could not last. The two men held very different visions for the future. Jamukha believed in the old ways, in keeping the noble families on top and the common people below them. Temujin believed in raising people up by their deeds. As their followers grew, so did the distance between them, until at last the two friends became rivals. The bond they had sworn was broken, and the steppe once again divided into camps that prepared to fight. It was a painful split, for these had once been brothers in everything but blood, and now they would face each other across the field of battle. the grass had room for only one of them at the top. The years that followed were filled with shifting alliances, sudden betrayals, and many hard-fought battles. Temujin suffered defeats that would have crushed a weaker man. There were times when his forces were scattered and he was forced to flee, gathering his strength again from almost nothing. But each time he rose back up, a little wiser and a little stronger than before. He learned which leaders he could trust and which would turn on him the moment it served them. He learned how to win not only with weapons, but with patience, with mercy offered to those who surrendered, and harsh punishment given to those who betrayed him. One by one, he overcame his rivals, including the tribe that had once poisoned his father, until at last, the great chief Togrul, his old protector, turned against him as well, and Temujin was forced to defeat even him. By the time Temujin had defeated his greatest rivals, the steppe had changed forever. The man who had once been a hunted outcast, a boy with a wooden collar around his neck, now stood at the head of the most powerful following the grasslands had ever seen. The tribes that had spent generations tearing one another apart were beginning to fall under a single leader. It had taken decades of struggle, of loss and survival and patient effort, but the impossible was slowly becoming real. The scattered people of the steppe were being woven together into one, and the man who had done this stood ready to take a new name, a name that the whole world would come to know and to fear in the years ahead. In the year 1206, the leaders of the steppe gathered together for a great meeting. Such a gathering was called a Kurultai, and it was where the tribes came to make their most important decisions. They met near the source of a sacred river, in a place wide enough to hold thousands of riders and their families. The felt tents spread across the grass as far as the eye could see, and the smoke of countless fires rose into the wide sky. People came from every direction, from tribes that had once been bitter enemies, now bound together under one man. It was a sight that no one on the steppe had ever witnessed before, a coming together of peoples who had spent their whole history apart. At this great gathering, the assembled leaders raised Temujin up and gave him a new title. They named him Genghis Khan, which meant something like universal ruler, the leader of all who lived in the felt tents. It was more than a name. It was a declaration that the old world of scattered tribes was gone, and that a new and united nation had been born. The man who had survived abandonment, captivity, and countless betrayals now stood as the single ruler of the entire steppe. From the freezing grass, where he had once dug for roots to keep from starving, he had risen to a height no one of his people had ever reached. The boy left to die had become a Khan over all. But Genghis Khan understood that a title alone would not hold his people together. The old habits of raiding and feuding ran deep, and without strong rules, the union could fall apart as quickly as it had formed. So he set about creating a new order for his nation. He established a body of laws known as the Yasa, a set of rules meant to bind everyone, from the lowest herder to the highest noble. These laws punished theft and betrayal harshly, protected the messengers who carried word across the empire, and demanded loyalty above all else. For the first time, the people of the steppe lived under a shared code that applied to everyone the same way. The endless cycle of private revenge was replaced by a single law that came from the top. Genghis Khan also reshaped the way his people were organized. He broke apart the old tribal divisions that had kept everyone loyal only to their own kin. Instead, he arranged his followers into groups based on numbers, units of 10, of 100, of 1,000, and of 10,000. Men from many different tribes were mixed together in these units so that their loyalty would belong to the unit and to the Khan, rather than to their old families. This simple change was powerful beyond measure. It melted away the old jealousies and feuds and forged a single people with a single purpose. A man no longer fought as a Tatar or a Kherate. He fought as a part of the nation that Genghis Khan had built. He took special care with the men who served him most closely. He created a personal guard made up of thousands of warriors chosen for their skill and loyalty. These men were drawn from across the units of the army, and serving in the guard was a great honor. They protected the Khan, served as a school for future commanders, and stood as the heart of his fighting force. Through this guard, Genghis Khan kept the best and most trusted men close to him, and he watched and tested them, raising the finest to lead his armies. He understood that an empire was only as strong as the people who held it together, and he chose those people with the greatest care. By weaving laws, loyalty, and organization together, Genghis Khan created something that had never existed on the steppe before. He took a chaotic and divided people and turned them into a single disciplined nation, ready to act as one. The energy that had once been spent on endless feuding was now turned outward toward the world beyond the grass. This was the true turning point of the whole story. A united steppe was a force of terrifying power, and the lands that surrounded it had no idea what was coming. The settled kingdoms to the south and the west still saw the steppe people as scattered barbarians who could be ignored or bought off. They were about to learn how wrong they were, and the lesson would change the shape of the world. To understand everything that came next, we must pause and look closely at the army that Genghis Khan had built, for it was unlike any other force in the world at that time. The heart of this army was the horse and the rider. Every Mongol warrior was a master of riding, trained from childhood to live and fight from the saddle. A single warrior might bring several horses with him on campaign, switching from one to another, so that his mount stayed fresh and never gave out. This meant the Mongol army could travel astonishing distances in a short time, covering ground that other armies could only dream of. They could appear where no one expected them, strike and vanish before their enemies could even gather their forces. The main weapon of the Mongol warrior was the bow, but not just any bow. It was a powerful weapon made from layers of wood, horn, and animal sinew, built to be short enough to use on horseback, yet strong enough to send an arrow through armor at a great distance. A skilled rider could fire these arrows while galloping at full speed, even turning in the saddle to shoot behind him as he pretended to flee. They carried many arrows and different kinds of them, some for piercing armor, some for longer range. A Mongol force could fill the sky with arrows, breaking an enemy line before the two sides ever came close. When the time came for close fighting, they carried curved swords, spears, and other weapons, but it was the bow and the horse that made them so deadly. Yet weapons alone did not make the Mongol army so fearsome. What truly set them apart was their discipline and the way they worked together. While other armies often fought as crowds of individual warriors, the Mongols moved as one body, responding instantly to commands. On the battlefield, they did not shout orders, for shouting could not carry across the chaos and noise of battle. Instead, they used flags, banners, and signals to direct their movements, and at night they used torches and lanterns. A whole army could shift direction, split apart, and come back together in perfect order, all guided by these silent signals. To their enemies, it must have seemed almost unnatural, as if the Mongol army shared a single mind. Their commanders were also masters of trickery and planning. One of their favorite tactics was the false retreat. A group of Mongol riders would pretend to flee in panic, and the enemy, thinking they had won, would chase after them in a disordered rush. But the retreat was a trap. The fleeing riders would lead their pursuers into an ambush, where waiting forces would close around them on every side. Time and again, proud armies fell for this trick and were destroyed. The Mongols also used scouts who ranged far ahead of the main force, gathering information about the land, the enemy, and the best routes to take. They planned their campaigns with great care, often coordinating armies that were hundreds of miles apart, so they would arrive at the same place at the same time. The endurance of the Mongol warrior was another part of their strength. These were men who had grown up in the harshest conditions, used to cold, hunger, and long days in the saddle. They could survive on very little, drinking the milk of their horses and eating dried meat that needed no cooking. In a desperate moment, a warrior could even open a small cut in his horse's neck and drink a little of its blood to keep going, then close the wound and ride on. They did not need long supply lines of wagons and food that slowed other armies down. The land itself fed them, and their herds traveled with them. This freedom from heavy supply trains gave them a speed and reach that no settled army could hope to match. Genghis Khan also understood something that few leaders of his time grasped. He knew that he did not have to know everything himself, and that he could learn from the people he conquered. As his empire grew, he gathered skilled people from many lands, including engineers who knew how to build the great machines needed to break down city walls. The steppe people had no tradition of siege warfare, for they had no cities of their own. But once they captured engineers and craftsmen from China and other places, they learned quickly. Soon, the Mongols could build catapults and other devices to hurl heavy stones and fire at fortress walls. This willingness to learn and adapt turned an army of horsemen into a force that could conquer even the strongest stone cities. When all these pieces came together, the result was a war machine the world had never seen. It was fast, disciplined, clever, and tireless, able to strike across vast distances and to break both armies in the field and cities behind their walls. It was led by commanders chosen for skill rather than birth, and it acted as a single coordinated body under the will of one ruler. This was the engine that drove everything that followed in our story, the force that would carry the Mongol banner across China, across the deserts of Central Asia, into the heart of the Islamic world, and to the very edge of Europe. With this army at his command, Genghis Khan turned his eyes outward toward the rich and powerful lands beyond the grass, and the conquest of half the world began. The first great target of the Mongol armies lay to the south, in the rich lands of northern China. There, a dynasty known as the Jin ruled over a vast and crowded land of cities, farms, and rivers. This was a world utterly different from the open steppe. It was a place of walled towns and busy markets, of silk and gold and crowded streets, of a civilization far older and far larger than the Mongol nation. The Jin rulers looked down on the steppe people as crude and backward, fit only to be kept divided and weak. For generations they had played the tribes against one another, paying some to attack others so that the steppe would never unite. They did not understand that those days were now over. Genghis Khan had old grievances against the Jin, and he also saw their wealth and weakness with clear eyes. In the year 1211, he led his armies south against them, crossing into a land of fields and walls and millions of people. At first, the great challenge was the cities. The Mongols were masters of the open battlefield, but a walled city was a different kind of enemy. Behind their high stone walls, the defenders could hold out for a long time, and the Mongols had little experience with this kind of war. The early campaigns showed both the power and the limits of the steppe army. They could crush any force that met them in the open, but the cities held firm, and the war stretched on. So the Mongols learned. They captured Chinese engineers and craftsmen who knew the secrets of siege warfare, and they put this knowledge to use. They built great machines that could hurl heavy stones against the walls, and they learned how to surround a city and cut off all food and water until the people inside grew desperate. They used the captured population in cruel ways, sometimes forcing prisoners to fill the moats or to march ahead of the army as shields. This part of the story is a hard one, for the cost in human suffering was immense. Whole cities that resisted were destroyed, and the suffering of ordinary people, of families and children who had no part in the war, was beyond measure. It must be told honestly, even in a quiet telling like this one. The Jin had built their defenses around a string of mighty fortifications, including the great walls that ran along the northern edge of their land. These walls had been raised over centuries to keep the steppe people out. A stone barrier meant to protect the rich south from the dangers of the north. But walls are only as strong as the will of those who guard them, and the Mongols found ways through. Sometimes they broke the walls by force, and sometimes they passed through gates opened by defenders who had been bribed or who had lost hope. The great barrier that was supposed to keep them out could not stop them. The thing the Jin had feared for generations had finally come, and their wall could not save them. In the year 1215, the Mongols captured the great Jin capital, a vast city in the area of modern Beijing. The fall of this city was a tremendous blow to the dynasty, a sign that even their greatest stronghold could not stand against the steppe army. The riches of the city were carried away, and its fall sent a shock through the entire region. Yet the Jin did not surrender completely. They moved their capital farther south and fought on for years, clinging to the lands they had left. The war against the Jin would actually continue long after Genghis Khan himself was gone, for northern China was vast and its people were many, and conquering it took time and great effort. Still, the campaign against the Jin changed the Mongols forever. It proved that they could conquer not just other steppe tribes, but a great settled civilization, with all its cities and walls and wealth. It gave them riches beyond anything they had known, the silk and gold and treasures of China flowing back to the steppe. It gave them skilled workers, engineers, scribes, and administrators who could help them govern conquered lands. And it gave them confidence, the knowledge that no kingdom on earth, no matter how large or how old, was beyond their reach. The old world, with its belief that the steppe people were merely scattered raiders to be managed and ignored, was meeting a force it had never imagined and could not understand. For the people of northern China, these were terrible years. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to ruins, and countless lives were lost. The land that had been so rich and crowded fell quiet in many places, its fields abandoned and its towns emptied. Yet in time, the Mongols would come to rule this land, and they would learn from it as well, taking its knowledge and its systems of government and using them to hold their growing empire together. The meeting of the steppe and China was a collision of two worlds, one built on horses and grass, and the other on cities and rivers. Out of that collision, painful as it was, came a new kind of power. And while the war in China still smoldered, Genghis Khan was already turning his attention to a new and distant land far to the west. Far to the west of the steppe, beyond mountains and deserts, lay a wealthy and powerful empire known as Khwarezm. It stretched across much of what we would now call Central Asia and Persia, a land of great cities, rich trade routes, and flourishing learning. This was a Muslim empire, ruled by a proud and ambitious Shah, and it sat astride the famous trade roads that carried silk, spices, and treasures between the East and the West. Its cities were jewels of the age, places like Bukhara and Samarkand, filled with libraries, mosques, markets, and beautiful gardens. To travelers of the time, these cities seemed like wonders, centers of wealth and knowledge that rivaled any in the world. It was a civilization at the height of its power and pride. Genghis Khan, for his part, did not at first seek war with Khwarezm. He had his hands full with the conquest of China, and what he wanted from the West was trade. The Mongols and the merchants of Central Asia could grow rich together if goods flowed freely across the roads between their lands. So Genghis Khan sent a great caravan of merchants westward, carrying valuable goods and a message of peace and friendship. He hoped to open a steady trade between his empire and the empire of the Shah, to the benefit of both. It was a reasonable and even generous offer, and had it been accepted, the history of the world might have unfolded very differently. But the caravan never completed its mission. When it reached a city on the edge of the Khwarezmian Empire, the local governor accused the merchants of being spies. Whether he truly believed this or simply wanted their valuable goods for himself, we cannot fully know. What we do know is that he had the merchants seized and killed, and their goods taken. It was a grave insult and a terrible crime against people who had come in peace. Yet even then, war was not certain. Genghis Khan, holding his anger in check, sent envoys to the Shah himself, asking that the guilty governor be punished and the wrong be set right. He gave the Shah a chance to make peace and to avoid the storm that was gathering. The Shah's response sealed the fate of his empire. Instead of handing over the governor or offering any apology, he treated the envoys with contempt. By some accounts, he had the chief envoy killed and the others humiliated and sent back with their beards shaved off, a deep insult in that culture. This was an act of pride and arrogance beyond measure. The Shah ruled a great and wealthy empire, and he believed himself far above the steppe ruler from the distant east. He did not understand the nature of the man he had insulted, nor the power of the army that stood behind him. He treated Genghis Khan as a barbarian to be brushed aside, and in doing so, he doomed everything he ruled. When word of the murdered envoys reached Genghis Khan, the story tells that he climbed a hill alone and prayed for many days, asking for strength and resolve. The peaceful trader had been pushed beyond all patience. The man who had offered friendship now prepared for war, and the war he prepared would be one of the most terrible the world had ever seen. He gathered an enormous army, drawing warriors from across his empire, and he made careful plans for the long march west. The campaign would cross great distances, over mountains and deserts, against an empire that on paper was larger and richer than his own. But the Shah had made a fatal mistake, and there would be no mercy now. It is worth pausing to feel the weight of how this all began. An entire flourishing civilization, with its great cities and its centuries of learning, was brought to the edge of destruction because of a single arrogant choice. Had the governor not killed the merchants, had the Shah simply offered justice, the storm might never have come. But pride blinded the rulers of Khwarezm, and they could not see the danger until it was upon them. It is one of history's hardest lessons, that the choices of a few proud men can bring ruin to millions. The merchants who died at the border never knew what their deaths would set in motion, nor did the people of the great western cities, who would soon pay so terrible a price. The Shah, even as he faced the coming storm, made another grave error. Rather than gathering his huge army into a single force to meet the Mongols in open battle, he scattered his soldiers among his many cities, hoping the strong walls would hold the invaders back. This decision played directly into Mongol hands, for it allowed Genghis Khan to defeat the empire piece by piece, city by city, rather than facing its full strength at once. The Shah trusted in his walls and his wealth, but he had forgotten that the Mongols had already learned to break the walls of China. The empire of Khwarezm, for all its riches and pride, was about to face a force it could not stop, and the great cities of Central Asia were about to enter the darkest chapter of their long history. The storm fell upon Central Asia in the year 1219, and it was a storm unlike any the region had ever known. Genghis Khan led his armies west in several columns, moving with the speed and coordination that had become their hallmark. They crossed great distances that the enemy believed impossible, even pushing through a vast desert that the Shah thought no army could ever traverse. By doing this, the Mongols appeared deep behind the enemy lines, striking where they were least expected. City after city found Mongol armies at their gates, and the careful defenses of the Shah crumbled as his scattered forces were cut off and surrounded one by one. The empire that had seemed so mighty began to come apart with frightening speed. One of the first great cities to fall was Bukhara, a place renowned for its learning and its beauty. It was a center of religious study and trade, filled with scholars, merchants, and craftsmen. When the Mongols arrived, the defenders could not hold, and the city was taken. The story tells that Genghis Khan himself rode into the great mosque at the heart of the city, a place of deep meaning to its people, and that he spoke to the gathered inhabitants there. The city was given over to plunder, its wealth carried away, and much of it was burned. A place that had stood for centuries as a jewel of the region was broken in a matter of days. The shock of it spread across the land, carried by those who fled. Then came Samarkand, perhaps the greatest prize of all, a city famous throughout the world for its splendor. It had strong walls and a large garrison, and its people hoped it might withstand the invaders. But the Mongols surrounded it and pressed their attack, and within a short time, the city fell. Its defenders were overcome, its treasures taken, and many of its people killed or carried off. The skilled craftsmen were often spared and sent back to the Mongol lands to serve their conquerors, for their talents were valued. But the city itself was emptied of much of its life and glory. The same fate fell upon other great cities of the region, each one a center of culture and trade that had taken generations to build and was undone in mere weeks. This part of the story is one of the darkest in all of history, and it must be told honestly. The destruction the Mongols brought to Central Asia was on a scale that is hard to comprehend. Cities that resisted were often destroyed completely, their walls torn down and their populations scattered or killed. The cost in human life was staggering, beyond what numbers can truly capture. These were not soldiers alone, but families, scholars, craftsmen, ordinary people who had built their lives in these places over many generations. The grief and loss of those days echoed for centuries. We name this cost not to dwell in horror, but to honor the truth, for the people who suffered deserve to be remembered with care and with honesty. The Mongols had a clear and deliberate strategy behind this destruction. They understood the power of fear. When a city resisted and was then destroyed, word of its fate spread to all the cities nearby. Many places, hearing what had happened to those who fought back, chose to surrender without a battle, hoping for mercy. In this way, terror became a weapon as powerful as any bow or sword. The Mongols did not destroy out of simple cruelty alone, but as a calculated method to break the will of an entire region quickly. It was a cold and terrible logic, and it worked. The empire of the Shah, which had seemed so strong, collapsed in a single season under the weight of this storm. Some of the cities that were destroyed never truly recovered. Great centers of irrigation, where careful systems of canals had turned dry land into rich farmland over centuries, were ruined when the people who maintained them were gone. Without the constant care of human hands, the canals filled with sand and the fields returned to desert. In this way, the destruction reached beyond the immediate killing and shaped the land itself for generations to come. Places that had been green and productive became empty and dry. The civilization that had flourished along these trade roads was wounded so deeply that some of it simply faded from the world. Its glory remembered only in old books and the ruins left behind. Yet even in the midst of this destruction, the Mongols showed the careful side of their nature. They spared those with valuable skills, gathering craftsmen, engineers, scholars, and others who could serve the empire. They protected, in their own way, the trade routes they had broken, for they understood that a flow of goods could bring wealth once the conquest was complete. And they often allowed people of different faiths to continue their worship, for Genghis Khan had little interest in forcing his beliefs on others. The destruction was terrible, but it was also part of a larger design, a remaking of the world under Mongol rule. The storm passed, and where it had passed, the old order was simply gone, swept away as if it had never been. With the great cities fallen, the Mongols turned to the hunt for the Shah himself, who had fled westward to escape the armies that had destroyed his empire. Genghis Khan was not content to let the ruler who had insulted him slip away. He sent 2 of his finest generals with a force of thousands of riders to chase the Shah down wherever he might run. What followed was one of the most remarkable pursuits in all of history. The Mongol riders chased the Shah across mountains, rivers, and deserts, never stopping, never letting him rest. The Shah ran from place to place, gathering what forces he could, but everywhere he turned, the relentless pursuers were close behind. There was no kingdom that could shelter him from such hunters. The Shah's flight took him across vast distances, all the way to the shores of the Caspian Sea. There, broken and exhausted, with his great empire destroyed and his army scattered, he sought refuge on a small island. It was there, on that lonely island, that he died, a sick and defeated man who had once ruled one of the richest empires in the world. He had lost everything, brought down by his own pride and the terrible force he had foolishly provoked. The great Shah, who had shaved the beards of envoys and thought himself above the steppe ruler, ended his days as a hunted fugitive, dying alone far from the cities he had failed to protect. It was a fall as complete as any in history. But the 2 generals who had hunted the Shah did not simply turn back once he was dead. Instead, they asked Genghis Khan for permission to continue, to ride farther west and explore the lands beyond. With his blessing, they led their force of thousands on an extraordinary journey, a great loop through lands no Mongol had ever seen. They rode through the mountains of the Caucasus, a wild region of high peaks and fierce peoples, fighting their way through any who stood against them. They pushed on into the lands north of the great seas, into the open plains where new peoples and new kingdoms awaited. It was a scouting expedition on a scale never before attempted, a long-range raid that covered thousands of miles through hostile and unknown territory. In the lands to the north, they encountered the peoples of the steppe beyond their own. including warlike tribes and the princes of the Russian lands. A great force gathered to oppose them, an alliance of local princes and steppe warriors who hugely outnumbered the small Mongol army. The two sides met in battle near a river, and the Mongols used their favorite tactics with deadly effect. They drew the enemy into a long pursuit with a feigned retreat, stretching the opposing forces thin and breaking their coordination. Then they turned and destroyed them. Despite being far from home and badly outnumbered, the Mongol force won a crushing victory against an enemy fighting on their own ground. It was a stunning display of skill and discipline against impossible odds. The journey of these two generals was more than a raid. It was a scouting mission that gathered priceless knowledge about the lands, peoples, and armies of the West. The Mongols learned the routes through the mountains, the strength of the kingdoms beyond, and the lay of the distant plains. All of this information was carried back home, where it would be carefully remembered. Years later, when the Mongols returned to these lands in force, they would already know the way, already understand their enemies. This single expedition, born from the hunt for a fleeing Shah, planted the seeds for the Great Western Campaign that would one day make Europe tremble. Few raids in history have reached so far or mattered so much. The endurance required for such a journey is almost beyond imagining. These men rode for years, crossing some of the harshest terrain on Earth, fighting battles against unknown enemies, surviving on what the land could provide. They had no supply lines reaching back to their homeland, no fortresses to retreat to, no reinforcements to call upon. They relied entirely on their horses, their skill, and their iron discipline. Through freezing mountain passes and burning deserts, across wide rivers and endless plains, they pressed on without rest. The toughness of the steppe, the hardness bred into these men by their harsh upbringing, carried them through trials that would have destroyed any other army. They were riders who seemed to know no limits, no edges to the world they could not reach. By the time these generals returned to the heart of the empire, the conquest of Central Asia and Persia was complete. The empire of Khwarezm was gone, its cities broken, its Shah dead, its lands now under Mongol control or laid waste. Genghis Khan had answered the insult of the murdered merchants with a campaign so devastating that it would be remembered for 1,000 years. The boy, who had been left to die on the steppe, now ruled over an empire that stretched from the borders of China in the east to the lands of Persia in the west. It was already one of the largest empires the world had ever seen, and it had been built in a single lifetime. Yet the man who built it was growing old, and his own end was drawing near. After the Great Western Campaign, Genghis Khan returned to his homeland, but his work was not finished. There were still rebellions to put down and unfinished conquests to complete. In particular, a kingdom in the area of northwestern China, a people known as the Tanguts, who ruled a realm called Western Xia, had refused to send troops to aid the Mongols during the Western Campaign. This was seen as a betrayal, and Genghis Khan was not a man to forget such things. Though he was now advanced in years, he led his armies once more, this time against the Tanguts, determined to bring them to heel. It was to be his final campaign, the last great effort of a life spent almost entirely at war. During this campaign, Genghis Khan fell ill, or by some accounts was injured in a fall from his horse while hunting. He was an old man now, worn by decades of hardship, battle, and the endless burdens of rule. His health declined as the campaign went on, even as his armies pressed the Tanguts hard and brought their kingdom toward its end. He knew that his time was running short, and he gathered his thoughts about the future of the empire he had built. He had spent his whole life rising from nothing to the heights of power, uniting a divided people and leading them to conquer half the known world. Now, as his strength faded, he prepared to leave it all behind. In the year 1227, Genghis Khan died. The exact cause of his death remains uncertain, and much about his final days is wrapped in mystery. According to the customs of his people, his death was kept secret for a time so as not to disturb the ongoing campaign, and the kingdom of the Tanguts was destroyed shortly afterward. His body was carried back toward his homeland to be buried according to the traditions of the steppe. And here the mystery deepens, for the location of his grave was kept utterly secret, and it has never been found to this day. The man who conquered half the world vanished into the earth without a trace, his final resting place hidden so well that it has remained a mystery for 8 centuries. The stories about his burial only add to the legend. It is said that those who carried him to his grave killed anyone they met along the way, so that no one could reveal the route. It is said that after he was buried, horses were driven back and forth across the grave to flatten the earth and hide all sign of it, and that the grass was allowed to grow back so that nothing marked the spot. Whether all of these tales are true, we cannot know, but the result is plain. The grave of Genghis Khan lies somewhere on the steppe he loved, unmarked and unknown, swallowed by the same grass that had once tried to claim him as a starving child. There is something fitting in that quiet ending. What Genghis Khan left behind was almost beyond measure. He had taken a scattered, feuding collection of tribes and forged them into a single nation. He had built an army unlike any in the world and led it to conquer lands from China to Persia. He had created laws and systems of organization that would hold his empire together. And he had raised up a generation of brilliant commanders and capable sons who could carry on his work. The empire he passed on to his heirs was the largest the world had yet seen, and it was still growing. The momentum he had created would carry the Mongol armies onward for decades after his death, into lands he himself had never seen. Yet for all his power, he remained in many ways a man of the steppe to the end. He never built grand palaces for himself or surrounded himself with soft luxury. He lived much of his life in tents, moving with the seasons as his people always had. He valued loyalty, skill, and courage above wealth and comfort. He was capable of terrible destruction, as the broken cities of Central Asia bear witness. Yet he was also a builder, a maker of order out of chaos. He was a complex figure shaped by a harsh world and shaping it in turn. To his own people, he was the great founder, the father of their nation, and they would honor his memory for centuries. With his passing, a moment of stillness settled over the empire, a pause as the world absorbed the loss of the man who had created it. But it was only a pause. The nation he had built was strong, and the men he had raised were ready to carry on. The conquest would continue, reaching farther than even Genghis Khan had gone, into Europe and into the heart of the Islamic world. The story he had begun was far from over. The boy left to die had built something that would outlast him by generations, a vast empire that would now pass into the hands of his sons, who would divide the world among themselves and push its borders ever outward. When Genghis Khan died, the question of who would rule after him had to be answered carefully. He had several sons, and among the steppe peoples, the succession of a great leader was always a dangerous moment, a time when an empire could tear itself apart. But Genghis Khan had thought ahead. Before his death, he had made his wishes known, choosing his third son, a man named Ogedei, to become the next great Khan. Ogedei was known as a generous and even-tempered man, well-liked and able to keep his ambitious brothers working together rather than fighting one another. After a period of mourning and the proper gathering of leaders, Ogedei was raised up as the new great Khan, taking his father's place at the head of the empire. The other sons and their families were each given their own portions of the empire to rule. The eldest son's line received the lands far to the west, the great plains north of the seas, where the scouting generals had ridden years before. Another son received lands in Central Asia, and another the heartland of the steppe. In this way, the empire was divided among the family, with each branch ruling its own great region, while still recognizing the great Khan as the supreme leader of all. This arrangement worked well at first, for the family was held together by the memory of their father and by the shared glory of conquest. The empire remained one, even as it was shared among the descendants of the man who had built it. Ogedei proved to be an effective ruler in his own right. He understood that an empire could not be governed forever from horseback, and he set about building a true capital for the Mongol nation. This city, called Karakorum, rose on the steppe as a center of government, trade, and diplomacy. It was a strange and wonderful place, where people and goods from across the known world came together. Merchants from China, Persia, and even distant Europe could be found in its streets, along with craftsmen, scholars, and envoys from many lands. For a people who had once owned nothing but their tents and their herds, the building of a capital city was a remarkable step, a sign of how far they had come and how their empire was changing. Ogedei also continued the work of conquest that his father had begun. He sent armies in many directions at once, for the Mongol war machine was still strong and hungry for new lands. In the east, the long war against the Jin dynasty of northern China was finally brought to its conclusion, and that ancient realm was at last completely conquered. The Mongols now ruled all of northern China, with its vast population and great wealth. This was a tremendous achievement, the completion of a campaign that had begun in Genghis Khan's own lifetime. With northern China secure, the empire had a foundation of immense strength, and Ogedei could turn his attention to conquests farther afield. He also set in motion the campaigns that would carry the Mongols deeper into the world than ever before. He ordered a great expedition to the west, into the lands the scouting generals had visited years before. This would become one of the most famous campaigns in all of Mongol history, the invasion that would crush the Russian lands and bring terror to the kingdoms of Europe. Ogedei placed this campaign under the leadership of capable commanders, including a young prince of the eldest son's line and one of the greatest generals the Mongols ever produced. The careful knowledge gathered during the earlier scouting expedition would now be put to use, as the Mongols returned to the west not as raiders, but as conquerors. The empire under Ogedei was a thing of astonishing reach and energy. It stretched across the whole breadth of Asia, and its armies were active on multiple fronts at the same time, something few powers in history have ever managed. The roads of the empire carried messengers at incredible speed, allowing orders to travel from the capital to distant armies in a fraction of the time other realms required. A system of relay stations where riders could change to fresh horses allowed news and commands to cross the empire with remarkable swiftness. This network bound the vast realm together and let the great Khan keep his hand on events thousands of miles away. The machine that Genghis Khan had built was running at full power, and it showed no sign of slowing. So it was that the empire kept moving forward even after the man who had begun it was gone. The momentum he had created, the systems he had put in place, the loyalty he had inspired, all of these carried his work onward into a new generation. His sons divided the world among themselves and pushed its borders ever outward, into lands their father had never imagined. And now the greatest of these new campaigns was about to begin, as the Mongol armies turned their faces toward the west, toward the Russian lands and the kingdoms of Europe that lay beyond. The riders of the steppe were coming, and the people of the west had no idea what was about to fall upon them. The Great Western Campaign began in the late 1230s, and it would prove to be one of the most devastating invasions Europe had ever faced. A large Mongol army, led by skilled commanders who knew the western lands from earlier scouting, swept into the territory of the Russian principalities. These were not yet a single unified Russia, but a collection of separate states, each ruled by its own prince, often quarreling among themselves. This division made them weak, for they could not unite against the common threat. The Mongols, masters of striking at divided enemies, fell upon them one at a time. City after city was besieged and taken, and the proud principalities of the Russian lands were brought low one by one. The campaign was carried out with terrible efficiency, and it had one feature that made it especially fearsome. The Mongols chose to attack in winter. To most armies, winter was a season to rest, when cold and snow made movement difficult and campaigning nearly impossible. But the Mongols turned this on its head. The frozen rivers, which in other seasons would have been barriers to an army, became smooth highways of ice across which their cavalry could ride swiftly. The hard frozen ground made for easy travel, and the people of the Russian lands, expecting safety in the cold months, were caught unprepared. Out of the snow and the frozen mist came the Mongol riders, falling upon towns that had thought themselves safe until spring. One by one, the great cities of the Russian lands fell. The fighting was fierce and the cost was high, for many cities resisted bravely. But against the Mongol war machine, courage alone was not enough. The siege engines battered the walls, the disciplined armies overwhelmed the defenders, and the cities were taken, plundered, and often burned. The grand city of Kiev, one of the oldest and most important centers of the Russian world, was besieged and captured, its glory shattered. The destruction left scars that would last for generations. The Russian lands fell under Mongol domination, a state of affairs that would continue for a very long time, shaping the history of that region in deep and lasting ways. Having conquered the Russian lands, the Mongols did not stop. They pressed on westward, toward the kingdoms of Central Europe. They divided their forces with brilliant coordination, sending one army into Poland and the lands to the north, while the main force struck into Hungary. This division was no accident, but a careful plan, designed to keep the European kingdoms from joining their strength together. The Northern Army was meant to prevent the Poles, Germans, and others from coming to the aid of Hungary, while the main army dealt the decisive blow. It was the kind of large-scale coordination that the Mongols had perfected. Armies acting in harmony across vast distances toward a single goal. In Poland and the surrounding lands, the Mongols met the armies of the local dukes and the famous orders of armored knights. These knights were the pride of European warfare, heavily armored warriors mounted on great horses, accustomed to crushing their foes with the weight of their charge. They had never faced an enemy like the Mongols. At a great battle in the area of Legnica, the European army was drawn in, outmaneuvered, and destroyed by the swift and clever Mongol tactics. The knights, for all their armor and courage, could not catch the fast-moving horse archers, and they fell beneath a storm of arrows and well-timed attacks. The flower of the local nobility was cut down, and the way deeper into Europe lay open. Meanwhile, the main Mongol army had driven into Hungary, where the king had gathered a large force to oppose them. The two armies met near a river at a place called Mohi. There the Mongols showed once more their mastery of war. They surrounded the Hungarian camp, pressed the defenders into a tight and panicked mass, and then deliberately left an opening, a path that seemed to offer escape. The desperate Hungarians fled through this gap, but it was a trap. As they ran in disorder, the Mongol riders fell upon them and destroyed them in a long and merciless pursuit. The Hungarian army was shattered, and the kingdom lay open and helpless before the conquerors. The king himself barely escaped with his life, fleeing for safety as his realm was overrun. The effect of all this on Europe was beyond description. Word spread of an unstoppable enemy that came out of the east, an enemy that destroyed every army sent against it and laid waste to every land it entered. Many people believed that the end of the world had come, that these riders were a punishment sent from heaven, a sign of the final days. Fear gripped the courts and the common people alike. There seemed to be no force in all of Europe that could stand against the Mongols. Kingdoms that had thought themselves strong now trembled, waiting for the storm to reach them. The Mongols had crossed half the world and arrived at the doorstep of Western Europe, and nothing seemed able to stop them from going further. And then, at the very height of their triumph, with the road to the heart of Europe lying open before them, the Mongols suddenly turned back. To the people of Europe, it must have seemed like a miracle, an unexplained mercy in the face of certain doom. The armies that had crushed every foe, that had destroyed the Russian lands and the kingdoms of Poland and Hungary, simply gathered themselves and rode away to the east. The kingdoms that had been on the very edge of destruction were suddenly spared. To understand why this happened, we must look not to the battlefields of Europe, but to a distant event far away on the steppe, an event that would change the course of history without a single sword being raised in Europe. The reason for the Mongol withdrawal lay in the death of the great Khan Ogedei. Far away in the heart of the empire, Ogedei had died, and word of his death traveled across the vast network of roads and relay riders to reach the commanders in the west. The death of a great Khan was a moment of enormous importance, for it meant that a new great Khan would have to be chosen. And the choosing of a new great Khan required a great gathering, a kurultai, at which the leading princes and commanders of the empire were expected to be present. The prince who led the Western campaign, along with the other high-ranking leaders, needed to return to take part in this decision, for the future of the entire empire and their own place within it depended on who would rule next. So the great army turned back, not because it had been defeated, not because Europe had found a way to stop it, but because of politics and ambition far to the east. The commanders abandoned their conquest of the West and rode home to involve themselves in the struggle over the succession. It was one of the strangest and most fateful turns in all of history. Europe was saved not by its own strength, but by the death of a man thousands of miles away, by the customs and politics of the empire that threatened it. Had Ogedei lived a few more years, the Mongol armies might well have pressed on, and the history of Europe could have been entirely different. The whole future of the continent turned on a single distant death. It is one of those moments that reminds us how much of history rests on chance and circumstance. The kingdoms of Europe had thrown army after army against the Mongols, and all had been destroyed. There was no military reason to expect that the invasion would stop. By every measure, the Mongols had the power to push deeper into the continent, and the divided, frightened kingdoms of the West would have struggled to resist them. Yet the invasion ended, not through any victory, but through the workings of the empire's own internal politics. The people of Europe, who had prayed for deliverance, received it from a source they could never have imagined or influenced. They did not understand why the storm had passed, only that it had. The Mongols never returned to Central Europe in such force again. Although they would launch later raids and campaigns into the Western lands, the great moment had passed. The succession struggles, the growing divisions within the family, and the sheer distance involved all work to keep the Mongols from making another full-scale push into the heart of Europe. The lands of the West, which had come so close to falling under Mongol rule, were left to develop along their own path. The kings and princes who survived rebuilt their shattered armies and kingdoms, often without ever fully understanding how close they had come to total conquest. The danger faded into memory, and Europe went on, never knowing how narrowly it had escaped. For the Russian lands, however, the situation was very different. They remained under Mongol domination for a very long time, paying tribute to their conquerors and living under their shadow. The western branch of the Mongol Empire, which came to be known by the name of the Golden Horde, ruled over these lands for centuries. This long period of domination shaped the development of the Russian peoples in deep and lasting ways, influencing their politics, their society, and their sense of themselves. The conquest that had begun as part of the Great Western Campaign left a mark on that region that would endure for generations, long after the Mongol power itself had faded. The East had felt the full weight of the storm, even as the far West was spared. The turning back of the Mongol armies from Europe stands as one of history's great what might have beens. We can only imagine how different the world would look if the invasion had continued, if the kingdoms of the West had fallen as the Russian lands had fallen. Perhaps the whole course of European history would have changed, its languages, its religions, its nations reshaped by Mongol rule. But it did not happen, because of a death on the distant steppe and the politics of succession that followed. The thread of history bent at that moment in a direction no one could have planned. And so we are left to wonder, as people have wondered for centuries, at how close the world came to a very different fate. While the Western campaign had been unfolding, and in the years that followed, the Mongols turned their attention to another great target, one that would result in one of the most fateful events of the entire age. To the southwest lay the heart of the Islamic world, centered on the magnificent city of Baghdad. For centuries, Baghdad had been one of the greatest cities on earth, a center of learning, culture, and faith without equal. It was the seat of the Caliph, who was seen by many Muslims as the spiritual leader of their faith, the successor to a tradition stretching back to the founding of the religion. The city was famous for its libraries, its scholars, its houses of wisdom where knowledge from across the world was gathered, studied, and preserved. In Baghdad, scholars had translated and saved the works of ancient civilizations, the writings of Greek philosophers, the discoveries of mathematicians and astronomers and physicians from many lands. The city had been a beacon of knowledge during a golden age of Islamic learning, when great advances were made in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and countless other fields. Its libraries held countless books, the accumulated wisdom of centuries, treasures of the mind that could not be replaced. For the educated people of the world, Baghdad was a place of wonder, a city where learning was treasured above almost all things. It stood as a symbol of an entire civilization at the height of its achievement. The Mongol campaign against this region was led by a grandson of Genghis Khan, a capable commander named Hulagu. He led a great army into the lands of Persia and beyond, conquering as he went. Along the way, he destroyed the strongholds of a feared group of warriors who had long terrorized the region, breaking their power and capturing their mountain fortresses. With these enemies dealt with, Hulagu turned his attention to Baghdad itself and to the caliph who ruled there. He sent word to the caliph demanding submission, but the caliph, trusting in the holiness of his city and the strength of his position, refused to bow. He believed, perhaps, that the whole Muslim world would rise to defend its spiritual center, or that the Mongols would not dare to harm so sacred a place. He was tragically mistaken. In the year 1258, the Mongol army surrounded Baghdad and laid siege to it. The defenses of the city, which had once seemed so strong, could not hold against the Mongol war machine with all its siege engines and all its experience in breaking great cities. After a short siege, the walls were breached and the army poured into the city. What followed was a catastrophe almost beyond imagining. The great city was given over to destruction, its people killed in enormous numbers, its buildings burned and torn down. The caliph himself was captured and killed, bringing to an end a line of spiritual leadership that had endured for centuries. The heart of the Islamic world was shattered in a matter of days. The loss of life in Baghdad was staggering, a tragedy that must be named honestly even in a quiet telling such as this. But beyond the terrible human cost, there was another loss that wounded the world in a different way. The great libraries of Baghdad, holding the accumulated knowledge of centuries, were destroyed. Countless books and manuscripts were lost forever, thrown into the river or burned in the flames. It is said that the waters of the river ran dark with the ink of the destroyed books and red with the blood of the slain. The treasures of learning that had been gathered and preserved over generations, the works of scholars and thinkers from across the ages, were gone in an instant. This was a loss to all of humanity, a darkness that fell upon the light of knowledge. The fall of Baghdad marked the end of an age. The golden age of Islamic learning, which had flourished for so long, was brought to a close. The caliphate that had been the center of the Muslim world for centuries was destroyed, and the spiritual and political order that had held that world together was broken. The shock of it spread throughout the Islamic lands and beyond, a wound that would be felt for generations. A civilization that had reached extraordinary heights of achievement had been struck a terrible blow at its very heart. The consequences would echo through the centuries, shaping the history of the region in ways that endure even into modern times. Yet the Mongol advance into the Islamic world did not continue forever. After Baghdad, Hulagu pushed further into the lands of Syria and toward Egypt. But there, at last, the Mongols met an enemy who could stand against them. In the year 1260, at a place called Ain Jalut, a Mongol army was defeated by the forces of the Mamluks, a powerful military people who ruled Egypt. This battle was a turning point, for it showed that the Mongols were not truly invincible, that they could be stopped by a well-led and determined foe. The defeat at Ain Jalut marked the limit of Mongol expansion in that direction, halting their advance and saving the lands beyond from the fate that had befallen Baghdad. The destruction of Baghdad and the closing of the golden age of Islamic learning stand among the most consequential events of the entire Mongol story. A city that had been a wonder of the world, a center of knowledge and faith, was reduced to ruins, and the treasures of learning it held were lost forever. The wound left by this event ran deep and lasted long. It is a sorrowful chapter, one that reminds us how fragile even the greatest achievements of civilization can be, how the work of centuries can be undone in a matter of days.
The light of Baghdad had shone brightly for so long, and its darkening was a loss not just for one people, but for all of humankind. By the middle of the 13th century, the Mongol Empire had reached an extent almost impossible to comprehend. It stretched from the Pacific shores of Eastern Asia all the way to the borders of Europe and the lands of the Middle East. It encompassed the steppes of Central Asia, the rich farmlands of China, the deserts and cities of Persia, the forests and plains of the Russian lands, and much more besides. No empire in history had ever covered so much territory or ruled over so many different peoples. A traveler could journey from one end of the empire to the other, crossing through dozens of lands and cultures, and never leave the domain of the Great Khan. It was the largest connected land empire the world has ever known, a realm of staggering size. But an empire this vast was almost impossible to hold together as a single unit. The sheer distances involved made unified rule incredibly difficult. A command from the central capital might take weeks or even months to reach the farthest corners of the realm. The different regions of the empire were home to vastly different peoples with different languages, religions, and ways of life. Over time, the various branches of Genghis Khan's family that ruled these different regions began to grow apart. Each branch developed its own interests, its own concerns, and its own connection to the lands it ruled. The unity that had held the empire together under Genghis Khan and his immediate successors began slowly to loosen. The empire gradually divided into several great khanates, each ruled by a different branch of the family. There was the realm in the east, centered on China, which became the most powerful and wealthy of the divisions. There was the Golden Horde in the west, ruling the Russian lands and the western steppes. There was the realm in Persia and the Middle East, and there was the Khanate in Central Asia. While these Khanates still shared a common origin and at times recognized a supreme Great Khan, in practice they became increasingly independent, each going its own way. The single mighty empire that Genghis Khan had built was becoming a collection of related but separate states, each with its own ruler and its own destiny. This division was not the result of any single defeat or disaster. It was the natural consequence of size and time. No matter how brilliant its organization or how powerful its armies, an empire spanning the whole of Asia could not remain a single tightly governed unit forever. The forces of distance, of cultural difference, and of family ambition gradually pulled it apart. The very success of the conquest, which had brought so many different lands under one rule, also sowed the seeds of division, for those lands were simply too varied and too far-flung to be governed as one. It was a tide that no army could command, a slow turning that came as surely as the changing of the seasons. In the east, the most famous of the later Mongol rulers came to power, a grandson of Genghis Khan named Kublai. He completed the conquest of southern China, bringing that vast and ancient land fully under Mongol rule for the first time in centuries. He established a new dynasty to rule China, blending Mongol power with Chinese ways of government. Under his rule, China was reunited, and the Mongol realm in the east reached its height of splendor. It was to his court that travelers from distant lands came, including merchants and adventurers from Europe who carried back tales of the wealth and wonder they had seen. The Eastern realm became a place of great riches and sophistication, a meeting point of Mongol and Chinese civilization. Yet even as the Eastern realm flourished, the connections between the different khanates continued to weaken. They sometimes warred with one another, the descendants of Genghis Khan turning their armies against their own relatives. The dream of a single united empire ruling the world faded, replaced by the reality of separate states pursuing their own paths. Each khanate gradually took on the character of the lands it ruled, adopting local customs, religions, and ways of life. In Persia and the Western lands, many Mongols converted to Islam. In China, the rulers embraced Chinese traditions. The Mongols, who had conquered so many peoples, were themselves gradually absorbed and changed by those they had conquered, their distinct identity slowly blending into the cultures around them. So the empire that had grown too large to hold began its long, slow transformation. It did not collapse all at once in fire and ruin. Instead, it changed shape, dividing and softening, its different parts drifting apart and taking on new forms. The tremendous energy that had driven the conquest gradually faded, as the descendants of the conquerors settled into the role of rulers and were changed by the lands they governed. The age of explosive expansion gave way to an age of consolidation and eventually of decline. The greatest land empire the world had ever known had reached its limits, and the tide that had carried it so far began, gently and inevitably, to turn. In the end, the Mongol Empire faded as all empires do, its various parts declining at different times and in different ways. The Eastern dynasty in China eventually fell, replaced by a new native dynasty that drove the Mongols back to the steppe from which they had come. The Golden Horde in the West weakened over the centuries until the Russian lands it had dominated rose up and threw off its rule. The other khanates likewise declined, broke apart, or were absorbed into other powers. The descendants of Genghis Khan continued to rule in various places for a long time, but the great unified power was gone. The storm that had swept across half the world spent its force at last and settled into stillness. Yet the Mongols left behind far more than ruins and memories of conquest. For all the destruction they brought, they also changed the world in ways that lasted long after their power faded. During the height of the empire, the vast lands under Mongol rule were bound together and made safe for travel and trade. The great roads that crossed Asia became safer than they had ever been, protected by Mongol law. Along these roads moved not only soldiers but merchants, travelers, and ideas. Goods flowed from one end of the known world to the other, silk and spices moving west, and other goods moving east. This great age of exchange connected distant lands as never before, and the world grew a little smaller because of it. Along these open roads traveled more than just goods. Ideas, knowledge, and inventions moved across the empire as well, carried by the people who used its protected routes. Technologies and discoveries from one part of the world found their way to others, spread by the connections the Mongols had created. The mixing of peoples and cultures that the empire brought about left lasting marks on the lands it had touched. Even religions and beliefs traveled along these paths, carried by missionaries, merchants, and migrants. In binding together so much of the world under a single rule, the Mongols created channels of exchange that would influence the course of history long after their empire was gone. Out of conquest, in a strange way, came connection. The story of the Mongols is, in the end, a story of contrasts. It is a story of terrible destruction, of broken cities and lost lives and the darkening of great centers of learning. But it is also a story of unity, of trade, of the meeting of distant peoples, and the spread of ideas across a connected world. It is a story of how a people who began with almost nothing rose to rule almost everything, and of how that vast empire, having reached its limits, slowly faded back into the world from which it had emerged. It is one of the great stories of human history, full of both shadow and light, and it reminds us of how much the world can be changed by the will and the deeds of those who came before us. And so we come to the end of our long journey, from the cold steppe where a boy was left to die, across the conquest of China and Central Asia, through the gates of fallen Baghdad and to the very edge of Europe, and at last to the slow fading of the greatest empire the world has ever seen. It has been a vast and sweeping tale, and you have traveled all of it. Now imagine the steppe once more, the wide and open grass beneath a darkening sky, where the felt tents glow softly with the light of small fires, and the horses graze quietly in the cooling air. The wind moves gently over the grass, and the great noise of conquest has faded into silence, as it always does in the end. The land that gave birth to an empire that touched half the world lies calm and still beneath the stars, as it did long before any of this began, and as it does to this very day. Rest now, and let the quiet of that ancient grassland carry you gently into sleep. Thank you for spending this time with me, dear listener. Sleep well, and may your rest be deep and peaceful.